Security's Disinformation Board is even more pernicious than it seems. The power to decree what is disinformation now determines what can and cannot be discussed on the internet. It is now in the hands of trained disinformation agents of the US security state. The most egregious and blatant official disinformation campaign in the US took place 3 weeks before the 2020 presidential election. That was when dozens of former intelligence officials purported to believe that authentic emails regarding Joe Biden's activities in China and Ukraine, reported by the New York Post, were Russian disinformation. That quasi-official proclamation enabled liberal corporate media outlets to uncritically mock and then ignore those emails as Russian disinformation, and pressured big tech platforms such as Facebook and Twitter to censor the reporting at exactly the time Americans were preparing to decide who would be the next US president. The letter from these former intelligence officials was orchestrated by trained career liars, disinformation agents, such as former CIA Director John Brennan and former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper. Yet that letter was nonetheless crucial to discredit and ultimately suppress the New York Post's incriminating reporting on Biden. It provided a quasi-official imprimatur, something that could be depicted as an authoritative decree, that these authentic emails were, in fact, fraudulent. After all, if all of these noble and heroic intelligence operatives who spent their lives studying Russian disinformation were insisting that the Biden emails had all of the hallmarks of Kremlin treachery, who possessed the credibility to dispute their expert assessment? This clip from the media leader in spreading the CIA pre-election lie, CNN, features their national security analyst James Clapper, and it illustrates how vital this pretense of officialdom was in their deceitful disinformation campaign. This same strategic motive, to vest accusations of disinformation with the veneer of expertise, is what has fostered a new, very well-financed industry heralding itself as composed of anti-disinformation scholars. Knowing that Americans are inculcated from childhood to believe that censorship is nefarious, that it is the hallmark of tyranny.
The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Adam Schiff. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Does it surprise you at all that this information Rudy Giuliani is peddling very well could be connected to some sort of Russian government disinformation campaign?
Well, we know that this whole smear on Joe Biden comes from the Kremlin. That's been clear for well over a year now that they've been pushing this false narrative about the vice president and his son. And, you know, the idea that the president, that the White House counsel and others were made aware that Giuliani was being used by Russian intelligence and using Russian intelligence in the sense of meeting with an agent of the Kremlin and pushing out this Kremlin false narrative. The idea that they were knowing and still on the floor of the Senate during the impeachment trial, pushing this Kremlin narrative is pretty breathtaking. But I guess at this point, we can't be shocked by anything this administration does, no matter how craven.
Those who wish to censor need to find some ennobling rationale to justify it and disguise what it is. They have thus created a litany of neutral-sounding groups with benign names: the Atlantic Council, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, various fact-checking outfits controlled by corporate media outlets that claim to employ anti-disinformation experts to identify and combat fake news. This scam is the critical context for understanding why the Biden administration casually announced the creation of what it is calling a Disinformation Board inside the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. There is no conceivable circumstance in which a domestic law enforcement agency like DHS should be claiming the power to decree truth and falsity. Operatives in the U.S. security state are not devoted to combating disinformation. The opposite is true. They are trained, career liars tasked with concocting and spreading disinformation. As Politico's Jack Schaefer wrote, "Who among us thinks the government should add to its work list the job of determining what is true and what is disinformation? And who thinks the government is capable of telling the truth?" Our government produces lies and disinformation at industrial scale and always has. It overclassifies vital information to block its own citizens from becoming any the wiser. It pays thousands of press aides to play hide the salami with facts. Making the federal government the official custodian of truth would be like Brinks giving a safecracker a job driving an armored car. The purpose of Homeland Security agents is to propagandize and deceive, not enlighten and inform. The level of historical ignorance and stupidity required to believe that U.S. security state operatives are earnestly devoted to exposing and decreeing truth, as CNN's Brian Stelter evidently believes, given that he praised this new government program as common sense, is off the charts. Typically, any attempt to apply George Orwell's warning novel 1984 to U.S. politics is reflexively dismissed as hyperbolic. A free and democratic country like the United States could not possibly fall prey to the dystopian repression Orwell depicts. Yet it is quite difficult to distinguish this disinformation board from INGSOC's Ministry of Truth.
If you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
The protagonist of Orwell's novel, Winston Smith, worked in the Ministry of Truth and described at length how its primary function was to create official versions of truth and falsity, which always adhered to the government's needs of the moment and were subject to radical change as those interests evolved. After all, how nefarious and dangerous can a board be when it is governed by a person as frivolous and banal as this, calling herself the Mary Poppins of disinformation? Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas appeared on CNN to herald her as eminently qualified, a renowned expert in the field of disinformation. What does that even mean? What is the field of disinformation? This is all a sham, the whole industry. Indeed, the only valid basis for calling her a disinformation expert is that she has spread disinformation with such gusto. The most notorious of those was the pre-election lie that the authentic Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation. That is what makes it so disturbing that Homeland Security has just seized this power for itself. An agency with a long history of lying, run by lifelong disinformation agents, created a board to issue these official decrees, all overseen by a person who is so partisan and ideologically motivated that it is hard to take her seriously. The power that Homeland Security has just secured for itself is anything but a joke.
Step on all my enemies and never do a thing. I want to be rich, famous, and powerful. So all I have to do in life is sit around and sing.
Homeland Security's Disinformation Board is even more pernicious than it seems. By Glenn Greenwald.
Last week, you guys said that you needed this Disinformation Governance Board at DHS to make sure that freedom of speech is protected across the country and that these platforms are not used for forms of disinformation. So what changed?
It's going to pause. There's been a mischaracterizations from outside forces, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to pause it and we're going to do an assessment.
You think the board was mischaracterized? Then the Disinformation Board is being shut down because of disinformation? Is that what's happening here?
Look, the work doesn't stop. We're still going to continue the work. The DHS is still going to continue the work.
Okay.